The views expressed by our guests are their own and do not reflect the official stance of their employer or any affiliated organizations. Welcome back to the Counsel podcast. I'm your co-host, Daniel Abramoff. Today we have a great interview with the General Counsel of Zoeller Co, Jeffery. We're going to speak about his experience going from an engineer getting into law, as well as his experience within IP, dealing with IP in other countries, as well as with the board. Jeffery, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So you've had one of the more unique paths to getting to general counsel, starting as an engineer before transitioning into law. And I kind of want to start there. Can you share with us what first drew you to engineering and your Ph.D. work within semiconductor materials?
Sure. Well, I mean, part of it was I was fortunate. My father was an engineer, so dinner conversation was around technology, and so it didn't have this mysticism that I think sometimes it can have. And engineering itself was a tangible profession, right? It's not. Sometimes I think people believe it's you're sitting in a room doing math problems, which sounds to most people like a version of hell, but it's really not. I mean, it was solving problems, and a bit of a pun. I mean, it was a very concrete experience given my father's work in civil engineering.
And so at this time, did you imagine that you'd stay within that career?
No. I mean, I actually thought I was going to teach English in high school. That was where I kind of started. But then technology just kept calling to me. And, maybe it was an overindulgence in science fiction as a young man. But that element of what I could do as a profession just looked really attractive.
And so what was happening at the time in the industry that made you rethink engineering?
Well, I finished up my PhD. I actually finished up my research down here in DC at the Naval Research Labs. And I remember having this moment where I was looking at my PhD advisor and the gentleman over at Naval Research Labs that was supervising my research there, and realized, these guys aren't doing research. I mean, it was 85% grant writing. And, as I had gotten into the PhD, I had assumed I'd go work at one of our kind of industrial labs, like a TJ Watson or a Bell Labs. I was actually fortunate enough to get a slot at Bell Labs before I went to grad school, and really enjoyed it, but recognized that it just wasn't going to be as much fun as I thought it was. That, and I didn't know that I wanted to be one of three people that know the etch rate of gallium arsenide and a chlorine plasma, right? In the world. So I started looking around, and I happened to hear about this firm, Finnegan Henderson, and they were looking for people with technical backgrounds, advanced degrees, and they would kind of bring you in, and that's kind of how I landed in a law position. So.
And so when that first happened, what was that like going as a technical specialist, going through law school? What was that like becoming a patent attorney?
I had a good command of like the technology area I was working in, but knew nothing of the law. And, I also thought I was a decent writer. I quickly found out I really did not have the level of competency there that I thought I did. But it was also a time, I think, where law firms were really willing to train you up and willing to work with you. So at the beginning, I was able to leverage the technical chops that I had to kind of address the different issues. And then you just gain that experience with the law, understand how to craft and write arguments, and grow as an attorney. So it was a fantastic experience.
And so you've since worked in some very fascinating places in the world, right? You've Switzerland, China, and you've navigated global IP at a time when those systems were rapidly evolving. So while working in China during a period of major IP reform, what did you observe about how China's IP courts evolved and became more efficient?
There was a period where China was evolving so fast, not just on as a country, but also on their legal side, and IP was no exception. The Chinese are very good at going out, observing different systems, and then taking the best parts of those systems and bringing them back and incorporating them into their whatever they're working on. And their IP reforms were a perfect example of this. The original IP law in China was largely German-based, and there's some very good and strong traditions related to IP protection under German law. But they also were looked at, the U.S. system, and at that point the power of injunctions, how beneficial that was. And they took all of this, they built IP courts where they had technical specialists, so dual trained people where, their background is in, chemistry or electrical engineering or another hard science or engineering. And then they coupled that with the law, and it made for very, very robust courts. You could get through the material quickly. Some of the other advantages too are just inherent in the Chinese system, in that it is very much you build your case before you file it. So very different than the U.S. Actually, the U.S. is maybe the anomaly compared to many other systems. Very rarely do you find the kind of robust discovery that we have in the United States. And China was no exception there. So you kind of build these cases in advance, but that does a couple things. One, it really forces you to have clear arguments set out for the court, so you aren't going back and forth and kind of developing the case as you get your information. And two, you largely have the evidence kind of set up when you hit the court. So you're not, immediately, you're not filing the complaint and then, rolling into 9 months, 18 months of discovery. So in terms of timing, the courts were very fast. And because all that work is done up front, the trial schedule was really compressed. So now you're talking, 12 months to a first instance decision. And this is at a time when the U.S., if you were in a district court, like Northern District of California was probably running 36 months. Rocket docket, and Virginia was still, humming along at probably 12 to 18 months. But to be able to get a decision that fast and at a cost that was, between 20 to 30% of what you would pay for U.S. litigation, they really had a nice system that they put in place. Not perfect, right? And I think it has become more challenging perhaps to use those courts in certain instances. Like if you're dealing with technology where the state has a real interest, I think it's not as good a court as it can be if you're in a commodity good, like pumps, for example. I would feel very comfortable going to China, litigating even against Chinese entities there in their IP courts, because in general, the courts have done a good job. They are fair and they get to a decision quickly.
Right. And so, when you're looking at all these different countries with all these different challenges, what goes into thinking about protecting the innovation across multiple markets today?
I think it's a great question, because for me, it's always point of sale and point of manufacturing are my starting points, right? So if I know I'm going to, I really think you have to link your protection to your commercial plans. So if we're talking to my marketing people, and they say, we really expect, Germany to be a significant market for us, Germany's got to go on the protection list, right? Because you want to be able to build out that defensive IP position. You want to be able to protect your innovation there. But my questions are often, more probing than like, well, where are we going to manufacture this? Because if it's not in the U.S. and, just say, for example, we're manufacturing in Italy, I also want to do it in Italy. And the reason is I want to be able to control that entire stream, really think about the innovation protection, not just at the end product, but where is it going to start? With China, again, I think this is incredibly important just because it is still despite the current administration's efforts, it's still the manufacturing hub for the world. Sure. And if you're dealing with a good that is easily copyable, inexpensive to produce, having IP in China to protect that manufacturing starting point for your product is really key.
Absolutely. And I'd say that working with outside counsel in these different countries to keep you updated on all the different changes, all the different things that come out. Sounds like that would be a way you'd get ahead of that. Is that right?
Yeah. And less so now that I'm general counsel, but when I was really much more focused on intellectual property, I was routinely talking to, German counsel, French counsel, Chinese counsel, to not only know what the state of play was that day, but what did they see coming down the pipeline. And that to me was how you really find value for your clients, right? Because the beauty and the curse of intellectual property is it has such a long life. I mean, on average, you're going to get a patent and it's going to have about a 20-year lifespan. So much can change in that time frame. And so you really have to not be thinking about, the next 6 months or the next quarter, or you really need to be thinking like, what is the 3-year plan for this, the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan? Because you're potentially setting up innovation protection for that entire lifetime.
And that leads me to my next question, because we were talking about outside counsel, and in order to have plans like that, you do need somebody who's innovative on that end as well. And it's not easy to find that, right?
It's not, and it does take time. I mean, and it's not always, the places you'd expect, right? There's a lot of really solid IP boutiques out there that I've interfaced with before. I know particularly for myself, I always had kind of 3 tiers of counsel that I had available to me. The lowest tier, the kind of good, better, best. So my good counsel, I knew I could depend on them for routine filings, formal issues, these types of things. Mid-tier, if we had something where we felt it had some real potential, but I couldn't convince the business to spend, substantial sums, let's use them because I can still keep costs under control. And then I had my Top Gun, right? And this is, and some of these counsel their rates rivaled, U.S. East Coast counsel. So 1,500 to 2,000 an hour. But these were also counsel that I knew if I reached out to, it was a 15-minute call. They understood what I was looking for. We'd either worked together enough or they had prior experience enough that I didn't have to spend 2 hours educating my counsel to get where I needed to go. So I'm already efficient. But then on top of that, like their turnaround for answers, their turnaround for action was days, not weeks or months, which I accepted on it's always a balance, right? Like, you can have it fast, you can have it cheap, or you can have high quality, but you only get 2. Yeah. And this is the balance that you have to seek and align with the commercial goals.
Yeah, well, and I think on the end of outside counsel, because you were once in that seat, right? You're knowing that it can really only be 2 out of 3. I think it's your job to know which 2 out of 3 in the moment, right? And so that brings me to my question for you is, what would be some good advice for some outside counsel when it comes to tailoring their work product better?
That's a great question, Daniel. And I really appreciate it when counsel will reach out to me when we don't even have an issue, right? And it doesn't have to be, every quarter or every, 6 weeks or something like that. But, a biannual check-in, like, can I take you out to lunch and let's talk about what the commercial plans look like? What has changed? What is new? Where is your business heading? The big difference for me between being outside counsel and in-house counsel is in-house counsel, you are intimately involved in the business, right? You have one client, you are focused on what is that business trying to do. Outside counsel, you have a lot more clients and you're working on much more discrete issues, but being able to tie those discrete issues, like, why am I asking you to do this? You're the expert in this, right? Like, as general counsel, you become by default a generalist. You're not able to stay on top of all the different things that are happening in all the different areas of the law. But if you understand my business, you may be able to trail spot for me, far in advance, like, hey, on your labor and employment, this is coming down the pike from OSHA. Have you guys started thinking about this? Like, what's this going to do? Hey, I know you guys have a union contract negotiations coming up. we have this new rule that's going to roll out. Have you thought about how that's going to impact your negotiation asks and demands? So the more you want to spend time with me and understand my business, the better you can be as outside counsel.
What's funny is, most people would totally agree with that. But when it comes down to it, the day to day, there are a lot of people that are thinking, well, I don't want to be a bother. I don't want to, and it's true. You shouldn't be a bother. But if you're, it sounds like you are welcoming good, actionable advice or knowledge. And there's a lot of that out there.
I mean, at the end of the day too, lawyers are about relationships and we're about trust, and stuff will inevitably go wrong with the complexity of the things we are trying to do. But if we know each other and I know that, you tried your best, I'm probably going to give you a pass as outside counsel, even if stuff goes wrong. And those moments kind of help build that relationship so that I at least know you as a person and I'm comfortable that, this is not, you were doing your best, right, but whatever happened. We and of course, I want my counsel to be proactive. Like I always tell young lawyers that I'm working with, the worst thing you can do is show up with a client with a problem, but no solution. You got to get the solution first, because then you're like, hey, we've got a problem, but here's what we're going to do, is much better than showing up, throwing up your hands and starting to get everybody in a panic.
Touching on when you were outside counsel, how did your early relationship with Zoeller as outside counsel set the stage for joining them?
Yeah, I mean, that was really critical. The kind of funny part of it is I had served on a U.S. Patent and Trademark panel at one of their professional activities where they gather different stakeholders to kind of educate people about IP. And one of the guys from Zoeller was on my panel, and we just went out to dinner afterwards because, as I said, spending time with people and finding out what their business is about is important. After a couple months, he reached out to me, and they had a legal issue and asked if I could assist with it. And then the really funny thing happened is a couple months later, he called me up and he said, "Hey, our general counsel, we've only operated with virtual general counsel for many years. He's getting ready to retire, and we're looking to replace our virtual GC. Do you have an RFP or something you can share with me?" And I'm like, well, he needs to be about 6'3", blue-eyed, electrical engineer. Yeah, I mean, I could totally write that up. Of course, I'm joking. I said, of course, and, provided it. But then the kicker is I didn't hear from him for about 4 weeks. And I'm like, oh, I guess he really did want the RFP. Luckily, he called me back and said, oh, yeah, okay. By the way, are you interested in applying? And of course I was. And then that was kind of the beginning. I mean, and what was also interesting is they went from virtual counsel. I went in and interviewed. I thought it went great. And apparently it did, because they're like, yeah, we don't want virtual anymore. We need you to be here. And so, but again, those relationships in advance, those just, again, like you were saying, you don't want to be, calling this person up every, 30 seconds, but building those relationships over time so that one another. You start to get a sense of strengths and weaknesses.
Absolutely. And I think that the folks that see it more for the bigger picture understand that value could be offered without an immediate return. And in the long run, that is the return, is the value provided and the fact that you care. Yeah. So let's zoom out a little bit. And I want to get your thoughts on what makes a great general counsel.
Yeah, it's another great question, Daniel. I mean, ultimately, I think you need to be able to get the business to understand legal risk in their terms. And what do I mean by that? When I'm talking to my business partners about issues, I am very deliberate, and I don't want to get into a legal treatise kind of analysis with them. They don't care if it's subsection 6 or subsection 4. They want to understand, what do we need to do as a business to move forward? How are we going to solve this problem? Because it's usually there's a legal problem. How are we going to solve it? So it needs to be communicated to them in a way that businesses can understand it. And that's usually dollars and cents, right? It is helpful to my business if I can express, particularly helpful to my business if I can express risk in dollars and term cents. So, we're dealing with a compliance issue as an example. And I say, okay, if we are non-compliant, here is the potential downside. And it's going to be, this type of penalty, we potentially can't sell. But once I start to do that, I then need to take that to the next step and say, so the penalty is going to be, it could be up to $1 million, and the loss of business will be in the 5 to, 100 million. I don't have to give them an exact number, but I have to at least use professional judgment to gauge that range to help them kind of tee it up. And if you can provide that type of setup for the business, then they can say, okay, I understand what you're saying. The business is comfortable with this level of risk, or we're not. And then you have a real, and then you're having a real conversation with the business, right? In terms that they can understand, and you're expressing the risk in terms that they can apply against what they're trying to do with the business. One of the worst things you can do as general counsel or in-house counsel and at any level is tell the business no. That there's a common kind of joke about the legal department, in-house legal department being the no department, and you never want to be that no department. And that's for two reasons. One, you're not doing your job, honestly. If all you do is say no, that isn't helping advance the business. Right. And you are no longer the profit center like you are if you're in private practice. You're a cost center. Okay. So you've got to figure out how to support the business without saying no. I mean, it's fine to say, yes, we could do that, but we're all going to go to jail. How about if we do X? And usually that gets a good reception. But the other part of this is, and it's going back to the relationship, right? Like if I tell you no every time you come in my office, when something really terrible happens, are you really going to want to come and talk to me? Mm-hmm. And that's when I need you to come and talk to me the most, right? One of the worst things that you see happen in-house or even in private practice is when clients kind of hide an issue from you, because usually those issues don't go away, right? They just grow and grow until they metastasize. And now, the $500 or $5,000 solution is now a $50 or $5 million solution. Getting that information early, being able to address problems head on is really key. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really those two things. It's the relationship issue, and it's talking to the business in a way that so that they can understand legal risk, basically translate, if you will.
Well, it sounds like you're almost painting a picture with them, right? And it's because both of you understand both sides. This is the picture we're trying to paint. Let's dive into it and look at the pros and cons for each part of it, instead of just saying, nah, this is just how the picture goes. And that's,
I've never heard that analogy before, and I love it. I'm going to steal it. That's, that's very good. Yeah.
For attorneys who want to follow a similar path, what's your best piece of advice for them?
You've always got to be looking out for opportunities to grow as an attorney. I'll take my path just as an example, right? So I started off as a patent prosecutor. So it's very transactional. You don't get a lot of interaction with the client beyond kind of client instructions, which is, a great place to learn and build. But, as I became more comfortable there, I was always out, like talking to partners. I feel like it's a theme here. Like you have to go out and talk to people, right? You have to go, hey, what are you working on? Oh, that's really interesting. Do you need any help? I'm always amazed if I talk to, young attorneys and I say, well, what are your partners working on? And they don't know. I mean, you really, if you think about like the progression as an attorney, of course, you're not going to be like, first chairing litigation 3 years out of the gate typically, but you could certainly be supporting a partner and saying, hey, what do you need research on? What's next? And when applying this to what I was able to do, this led, so I was doing that. And then just asking around one day, well, somebody needed help with a solar project. And of course, with a semiconductor background, solar's right there. So that got me to solar. Solar then got me into green energy. Next thing I'm working on hydrogen systems. So just kind of growing out that entire line. And then also I always kind of joke the reward at law firms, it's a bit like a pie eating contest and the reward is more pie. But it is true. Like the hard work and good work gets you more work, but it's work that you want to get.
Well, I think the mentality that you touched on is very valuable because especially when you're first going into your career, I can imagine that you feel very siloed, right? You're very overwhelmed to begin with. So you might not even think to go and look around the ship. But if you go in-house, that would be the first move that you should make is go look around and explore and see how this place works. And so meeting people as well, I couldn't agree with you more. You know, I have a business where I host general counsel events and in-house attorney events, and it has changed everyone who's attended just because they have learned from others that they've met. They've made new friends, found new opportunities. So getting out there, meeting others, I think that is one of the biggest pieces of advice out there.
I agree. And I think it serves you well through your entire career. I mean, if you think about what a partner ultimately is doing, a lot of times it's business generation today. And I think that has become more and more critical as a skill. And it's not something you pick up in law school. I am unaware of any law school that does a business development program for their the attorneys they're teaching. But, at some point, like if you want to transition from just being a legal specialist, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Some people love that and it's a great career for them. But most attorneys, if they want to transition, and it doesn't matter if they want to end up in a GC role or in a partnership somewhere, you need to be able to go out and talk to people. You need to have a network. You need to be able to, if for nothing else, it's those helpful connections that you can make to demonstrate your value to someone, and I'm sure you have the same thing with your business, right? It's like, oh, you need somebody that can do privacy law. I happen to know this guy, I don't know if will be an exact fit for you, but now I'm like, wow, Daniel really knows the folks around here, and it builds your credibility.
Absolutely. And I'll add to that and say that a true networker is somebody who offers value first. That is, it's not easy to get to that point, but I think when you start thinking in that part of your mind where it's like, I can do this extra, and what does it really cost me? Nothing other than an email. Yeah. Well, I think this interview really touched on so many areas that are incredibly valuable to a lot of attorneys out there. And I just want to thank you again so much for sitting down with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. This was great.